Hi, everyone, and welcome to the second chapter of our course. Now, if you haven't watched the introduction to this course, I really suggest that you do that before continuing with the course because there are so many points that I've explained in that introduction that I believe are so important to understand before continuing with the course. So, in this chapter, what we're going to do is we're going to take care of some setup steps that are required for pretty much the rest of this course and all the other chapters that follow along after this one, chapter 3, 4, and etc. So um, we're going to talk about Flutter, Dart, Dartpad, how to install Flutter, whether you're on Windows, Mac, or Linux. And we're also going to talk about Xcode, Android Studio, and we're going to talk about a few very useful extensions to our code editor. So, if you're coming from a background where you haven't worked with any kind of programming language before, um, I'm going to take this chapter quite easy. So, if you're an advanced programmer already, you may want to skip this and you already have like Flutter installed, everything, you can skip this chapter without a problem. So let's start by talking about what Flutter is. Well, traditionally, developers and programmers or software engineers, however you want to call them, they've been creating and writing code with their fingers in different languages, and then they're targeting different platforms. It's very important to understand what a language, programming language is, um, versus a platform. Think of a platform as the end station where a software ends up being run on. So let's say Windows is a platform, Mac is a platform, Linux is a platform, and iOS that runs on all iPhones is a platform, Android is a platform, etc. Now, you would have programming languages that you as a software developer would use in order to target those platforms, to write software for those platforms. So you use a programming language in order to write a piece of code and be able to run that code on that target platform. Okay. So a programming language example is JavaScript, Python, Swift, Rust. Um, what else is popular right now? Java, Kotlin, all these. These are programming languages. So you as a software developer who's trying to learn Flutter would use then Dart as your programming language, as I will soon explain. So that has been the tradition that a person sits in front of a computer and says, okay, I want to write a program for Windows. Then they go and write some code, maybe with C#.net, or maybe they will just use some other technology. I don't know what's out there right now for Windows. Maybe they would use VB.net. And then they would be done and they will release the software for Windows and be like, okay, I'm done. Now, then someone comes in the project and says, oh, we need the same software for Macintosh, or we need the same software for some other, uh, uh, for instance, platform. Then you would have to go and write the same software, exact same code, pretty much for the other platform. So this process would be very repetitive in that you would have to write the same software over and over again. So things such as Flutter came in order to remedy that. So saying that a software engineer sits at home or sits in the office, works with a group of other people and a designer maybe, or a few designers, UXer as a product owner, etc. And then they would write the same code then, which will then be run on different platforms. So as a software developer, you wouldn't have to maintain different, uh, very similar pieces of code that only can be run on one specific platform. So Flutter in its ground basically is a UI framework for running beautiful and writing beautiful applications that run on multiple platforms at the same time. Developed by Google, has been in production for a very long time. It's tried and tested. It's open source, and if you don't come from like software engineering background, open source basically means that the code that is written for Flutter basically the code that makes up Flutter, is open to the public for finding bugs and also for contributing to it, or maybe just learning from it. So if you're, for instance, coming from a background of as a designer, it's kind of like you have your Figma file open to the entire world, or your Adobe XD source open to the entire world for them to watch what you're doing as you're designing, and also for them to be able to fix stuff in your design if they see it not working as it should. So that's open source. Um, so Flutter is open source UI framework developed by Google. What a framework means, I mean, if you're not coming from a software engineering background, a framework is kind of like a set of tools provided to you as a software developer. So you can use these tools, take a bit of this one, take a bit of that one, in order to produce an output. So Flutter in itself is a software, but it's more precisely referred to as a framework because of it's a collection of tools. So if you hear framework, just know, oh, it's a collection of things I can use to produce some output. Now, that's what Flutter is. But what powers Flutter is a programming language called Dart. And Dart has been in the making for more than 8 years, is a language that at the moment being maintained by Google, and also is open source. So anybody can contribute to it, anybody can learn from it and find exploits or maybe problems with it, and it will get patched by the public or by Google themselves. So Dart is the programming language that powers Flutter, you could say. So um, now you know what Flutter is, and now you know what Dart is. And I think in the next step now, what we can do is talk about a great piece of web software called Dartpad. Now, Dartpad, as I said, is a web software, or you could just call it a website that allows you to run or write your Dart code, maybe pure Dart code or code for Flutter, and run it directly in your browser without you even having to install anything. So just open your browser, and as you will see soon, we go to Dartpad and you will see how it looks like. So let me just show you a little demonstration here. So here I have Dartpad open, and I can actually increase the size so you can see a little bit better. I may have to rearrange some components here on the screen so you can see the screen better. So I went to dartpad.dartlang.org, and you can see here that there is a program written on the left-hand side. And I can actually, let this, what is Dart? Dartpad allows you blah, blah, text to be there so you can have context of what I'm talking about. And you can see that the program is sitting there, and you are allowed then to either change the program the way it is, or click anywhere here to see documentation down here, or press the run button. So I'm just going to press the run button, and you can see that the text hello got printed to the screen 5 times, plus the number of times it was actually printed is also printed to the screen. So hello 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So what you see on this side is the source code, if you remember from open source. So this is the source code written in the programming language called Dart. And this is the output of that program. So Dartpad allows you to write text here and just execute it and see the results immediately. So that's what Dart is. Dartpad is, and we're going to talk about Dart and Dartpad more in the course. But right now, what we should do is to start by installing Flutter, because you could say, okay, but Flutter is just the UI framework. How about Dart? Well, the way Flutter is packaged by default is that it includes the Dart programming language and its runtime. So the tools required to run any Dart code. It packages all of that in just one big chunk for you. So you don't have to go and install different components, like install Dart separately in Flutter. So Let's just then improvise. And I'm going to say in here, let's say install Flutter. Okay. Then you go to this beautiful website called flutter.dev. I'm going to increase the size here so you see. So we go there now, and you will see this beautiful website here. And what we're going to do is just to press on get started. And remember, we pressed on get started, but this website looks like this right now. Maybe in a few months or maybe in a few years, it will change. So you'll just have to find out a way to get to the installation part. Right now, it's called get started. And I can see it's located as docs.flutter.dev get started install. Then pick your platform here. I'm on a Macintosh, but if you're on a Windows, just click on Windows and then you get instructions on how to install Flutter. And then, or if you're on Linux, you can also do the same. Just get instructions for your platform. Now I'm on a Mac and I'm going to click on Mac, and then I'm going to look at this information here. I'm going to increase the size so it's a little bit easier to read. And it says, okay, download the following installation bundle to get the latest stable release of the Flutter SDK. SDK means software development kit, I believe. So it's just like series of tools for you to use. It's just fancy words. So then we're going to do that. Let's just get Flutter Mac. I'm going to download it. And it may take some time because it is actually quite a chunky bit of software. As you can see, it's almost 1.2 gigabytes. So depending on your internet connection, it could take, anything between a few seconds to a few minutes. After you've done that, then you will have to unzip that in some folder. So what that kind of means is just, I can see that my Mac is already decompressing this zip file for me, so I don't have to do that myself. And it's already decompressed in this place. So I'm just going to click on it and I'm going to show you its content. So it kind of looks like this. Okay. Now that you have this, what you need to do is to ensure that all these files are placed inside a location on your computer, which is protected so that you don't accidentally delete it. And it's also a good, you know exactly where it is. So by that, I mean, don't put it on your desktop, and don't put it in like documents or anything. It's not a document, it's a software. What I like to do is usually to have a folder on a Macintosh called dev. So I will open terminal here. As you can see, terminal, if you're not familiar with it, is an application that you can control pretty much the entire system with it. If you're on a Mac, or if you're on Linux or any Unix based system. And if you're on Windows, you can also do a lot with your terminal. So in Windows, that terminal is called CMD, I believe, as in command, I believe. On Linux and Mac, it's called terminal. I'm using a terminal here called iTerm. But if you're on vanilla Mac OS, then you would go and open terminal like this, which is just looking like that. So I'm going to open iTerm right now, which is my terminal. You can open the terminal that you're comfortable with. I'm going to increase the size of this. I like to place my installations for these pieces of software in my home directory, which is denoted by this little funny character /dev. And if I look at the contents of this, I can see I have a folder called tooling. If I say tooling and look at the contents of it, I can see Flutter is right there. So for me, Flutter installation, this folder that got downloaded for me in my downloads folder, I would go and copy its contents and place it in this folder. So if I say cd Flutter, and then you can see that I'm in my user dev folder, tooling Flutter. So this is where I choose to put Flutter. Now you can choose to put this downloaded folder anywhere else, as the documentation tells you, in the desired location, for example. So go ahead and do that. Pick a location. For me, this location works. For you, it may be, if you're on Windows, it would probably be like C backslash, I don't know, you could say dev backslash tooling backslash Flutter. This could be a good location for your tooling of Flutter. So I'm imagining now that you've done that. You've gotten a folder, and for me, it's this one where you've extracted your Flutter installation in. Now you can see that it says in this third step, you will need to expose Flutter's binary files to your system. And what that basically means is that Flutter as an SDK or a toolkit or a framework, it has a lot of bits and pieces of software in it. And some of these bits are more important in that sense that they're actually executable. In that, imagine that on your computer, whether it's a Macintosh, Windows, or Linux, you can have different documents. Some documents can be text, some documents can be images, some documents can be, I don't know what else they can be, and or a Word document, for instance. Okay, good. I came up with another example. Or they could be programs. A program is something that you can just double click on and a piece of software gets executed and then it will open. For instance, an example of the program is Microsoft Word. Another example of program is Google Chrome web browser. Another example of program is Safari. So these are programs, and Flutter comes also with its own built-in programs that do very specific and important things on your computer related to Flutter, of course. Sorry, I have to see my recording studio. Nothing you had to do. It was just for me. So these important programs that are inside the Flutter installation, which you just downloaded, need to be exposed to your entire system so that you can work with Flutter with ease. And that means if you're, for instance, from a design background, it will allow you to anywhere in your terminal just write Figma and Figma app would open. And that's the same thing with Flutter. In this folder, you see we're in the Flutter folder where you downloaded your installation and installed it in this folder. There's a folder called bin, which means binary. In here, there are so many things that are important to the entire system to run. You see, Flutter and Dart. These two, I said so many, but yeah, there's pretty much two. So these two binary executables need to be exposed to your system. And the way to do that on a Macintosh is to change your paths as is documented here. So the way I like to do that is I go and change my, so if I do a Vim and look at my ZSHRC, I can see my paths and you can see it here. So you see, I've actually put that export command as it is stated here. I put it here, you see. This may be a bit intimidating, to be honest with you. Well, all it's doing is that you see this file that I've placed here. I don't know if I can actually zoom into it. And if you can see, I don't know how that looked in the actual recording, but this is a sort of like a set of instructions to my terminal on this Macintosh to tell it where different bits and pieces of binary executables are placed, such as Flutter, Dart, Python, etc., etc. So when I install a piece of software in this way, you see, we just downloaded a package and just put it somewhere on our computer. Macintosh won't know about the stuff that's in it. Of course, it won't. So you have to tell it where those things are. Because otherwise, if you don't do this step, if you don't do the step 3, then every time you want to run Flutter, then you have to specify exactly where that Flutter command is. So for me, it would be in my home folder, dev tooling Flutter bin / Flutter. But if you do this, then you can anywhere in your terminal just write Flutter, and your Macintosh or Linux or Windows computer will know where to find it. So do that. Put these instructions as specified here in your path. And after doing that, you may need to reload your path using a command on Windows and Linux called source and ZSHRC for me. Depending on which shell you have, you may have to put that instruction in somewhere else. On Windows, I believe you will have to modify your environment variables. I remember this from many, many years ago. Let's see if you have to do that. Update your path, you see. If you wish to run Flutter commands in a regular Windows console, take these steps, blah, blah. From the start, search env and select edit environment variables for account. So what you'll just have to do really is just to follow these steps. I mean, I'm going through basically giving you some of the basics of these instructions so you can get like a head start, but these instructions can also change in the future. So don't rely just on what I'm telling you, please. Just go to the installation website here. Here, as you see, docs flutter dev, get started, install, and try to follow along with the steps provided. So after you've done all of this, you should be able to be anywhere on your computer and just say Flutter Doctor. Now, Flutter Doctor is a very important command because it looks at your Flutter installation and it kind of makes sure that it's in good health, as denoted by the word doctor. So because Flutter in itself is a framework and it depends on many other bits and pieces which your computer may need to have in order for Flutter to actually work optimally, um, Flutter Doctor will then go through a series of steps to ensure that first Flutter is updated and that you, for instance, have Android toolchain, that you have Xcode installed, Chrome, blah, blah. So I mean, this result at the moment looks quite fine on my computer, but if you're running Flutter Doctor for the first time on your computer, you may get a few problems. Some of the problems that you will experience probably is going to say Android SDK couldn't be found, Xcode couldn't be found, because if you're running Flutter on Windows machine or Linux machine, then you can't have Xcode. Xcode is like the software provided by Apple and only runs, unfortunately, on Mac OS. And it's used for compiling or creating um, Mac OS, iOS, and iPad OS pieces of software. So, although you can run Flutter on your Linux and on your Windows machine without a problem, you won't be able to produce or test your Flutter code running on an iPhone, unfortunately, unless you have um, access to Xcode. And the easiest way to get access to that is, of course, to have a Macintosh, and that's unfortunate because yeah, it's just not available for other platforms. So you've run Flutter Doctor, and it's basically going to tell you that, okay, now I'm going to assume that you're on a Macintosh. It's going to tell you that, okay, Xcode, for instance, you need to install Xcode. And the way to do that is you need to open App Store on your computer and just type Xcode here. And go and install Xcode on your computer. So depending on, I don't know which version is the latest at the moment, but if you're trying to develop Flutter applications that and also make sure that they run on your iOS phone or the iOS simulator, then you need to install Xcode. If you're on a Mac, if you're on a Linux computer or Windows, you don't have to do this step. Actually, you can't do, unfortunately, this step. So once you've done that, you also need to make sure that you've installed developer tools for Xcode. So let's see how we can do that. Developer tools, Xcode, command line tools, right? Let's see. Install from terminal. There's a command that you can execute in order to do that. And that command actually looks like this. Here, I will zoom into it so you can see better. It says sudo xcode select install. So you need to issue that command in your terminal. So if I do that and it says, what's the password? I'll enter my password. And it says they're already installed. So if you haven't done that, please go ahead and execute this command in order to install command line tools for your Xcode. Now, the next piece after Xcode that you will need is Um, let's see if I can actually bring up. So we've talked about Flutter Doctor. That was Flutter Doctor, and we also talked about installing Xcode. So I'm now bringing that up a little bit late. But now the next step is to install Android Studio. So what Android Studio is like the equivalent of Xcode, but for writing Android specific applications. Now, for in order to write Flutter applications, you don't need Android Studio per se, but you kind of need the SDK manager. Now, both iOS and Android, um, for programmers, they provide you with something called an SDK, just like Flutter is an SDK or toolkit. iOS and Android also provide you with SDK in order to write native applications. And since Flutter utilizes these native capabilities of each platform in order to, for instance, create an application that's compatible with iOS or Android, it will utilize the native components, or sorry, or the native pieces of software, namely called Xcode, namely called iOS SDK and Android SDK. So you need to download Android Studio so you get access to the SDK manager so you can install an Android SDK. Now, Xcode in itself, when you download the latest version of Xcode, it comes with the latest version of the iOS SDK. But Android Studio doesn't do that. Well, wait a minute. Yeah, it probably does in the latest versions, but we can check that out. So if you go to your browser and just say Android Studio, and then you open up developerandroid.com, let's just go there. And then you can just click on download Android Studio. And then there are download options, and you can see there's available for Windows, Mac, and Linux. So then please go ahead and download your Android Studio. And I can see that for Macintosh is a package, so you can install it easily. You don't have to unzip anything. And for Windows is also like an executable. So tar gz as well for Linux. So now let's say that you've done that. Now after doing that, then you should be able to bring up Android Studio. Let's see. I'll bring it up here. Now, when you bring up your Android Studio, it will just pretty much be empty here on the screen, and you'll get some tips and tricks how to use Android Studio. But the important thing for you here is to be able to install the Android SDK. So if you go then to Tools, I believe there is an SDK manager right here. So just ensure that you have an SDK installed. For me, I have Android 12 installed here. So ensure that you have one of these SDKs ready for you to use by Flutter. And as soon as you've done that, then when you run then your Flutter Doctor command, then the part about Android SDK is going to be ticked here. The Android Studio. So that's that. So we've talked about the Android toolchain, which is the Android SDK you can see. We've talked about Xcode. Chrome is just a web browser. If you want, you can have that. If you're developing Flutter applications for the web, it kind of is necessary. And then this, you're probably, if you're just getting started with Flutter, you're not going to have this VS Code part ticked, because VS Code is a code editor, an open source code editor provided by Microsoft. And it is the code editor that I'm going to use for the entire course, as we go on. And to be honest with you, I've tried Android Studio and I've tried VS Code for Flutter development, and I can highly recommend that you use VS Code just for its sheer performance, it's for its simplicity, extensions, and its ability just to really focus on a simple editor without bothering you with lots of bells and whistles. So it's a preference though. Some people use Android Studio for Flutter development and some people use VS Code. So I don't think one is better than the other. It's completely a preference. So that's for Android Studio and the Android SDK. So now let's go ahead and install Visual Studio Code, which is the tool that I'm going to use for this course. So let's bring up a new window, and I'm going to say install Visual Studio Code. And I'm going to bring the window up here so you see. Let's go here and and you can download the one that you prefer for your computer. I've chosen Mac, and for me specifically, I have a Macintosh with an Apple Silicon, so I then choose this one, Mac with an Apple Silicon, and then it's going to download that for you automatically. So it's just about 200 megabytes, I think, or actually 100 megabyte only. After you've done that, just on a Macintosh, you would go and put that on uh, in your applications folder. So I'm actually going to delete that, which I downloaded just now, because I already have VS Code on my system. So that's for Visual Studio Code. Um, so let's go ahead now. And now that we've done that, I'm gonna talk a little about talk a little bit about some extensions that we're going to use in Visual Studio Code. So let me bring up my terminal, and we don't need that. Let's go and bring up Visual Studio Code, and then I already actually have so many Visual Studio Code windows open, but I can just say new window, so you see how Visual Studio Code looks like, and then let's see, don't show again. Okay, so this is pretty much how Visual Studio Code looks like. So it's a very simple application to begin with. Now, what we need to do for this example is to enable a few extensions. Now, the first extension that we're going to enable is called Error Lens, and you need to go here on the left-hand side, find extensions, and just type error. If I can type error, and just say error lens, just like that. Click on error lens and just press enable or install, I believe it's called. So error lens allows you to see errors in line without you having to click on a specific line of error, basically. So it expands the entire error. As you're coding, you will probably have some errors in your code. That error will be then displayed right there in front of your face in its entirety. So you don't have to press a little small button to be able to see the complete error. So it's a fantastic extension, to be honest with you. Now, the other thing that you'll need is something called a bracket pair colorizer. And that bracket pair colorizer is something that is already installed in Visual Studio Code. It used to be an extension that you could download, but it was so popular that Microsoft has added that internally to Visual Studio Code. So you don't have to do that manually. By installing an extension. So now that we've talked about that, the next step is to actually install Flutter and Dart extensions. So here, just type Flutter. Let's do that. And then just click on the install button. I've already installed that, so there's a disable button for me here. The Flutter extension, and then you'll also need the Dart extension. So just type Dart and then install that as well. So after these two installations, we also need to install another great extension called Block, BLOC. I'm not going to go into the details of what Block is, because you will learn about Block a lot later in the course, but it is just a great extension to have as we go on. You're going to learn about it. So I can't really explain exactly what it is right now, but just install it and I will tell you more about Block later in the course, I promise. So that was basically installing a Block. Now, when you start up your Visual Studio Code, it probably doesn't look like the way it does for me. And that is because I have a custom theme installed on my Visual Studio Code called Tokyo Night. It is a very, very mellow, dark theme, as it's called. And themes in Visual Studio Code can be installed just like you install an extension. So if you like my theme, you're more than welcome to go into extensions and then search for Tokyo Night and just install it. So it has different theme colors as well. This is the one I use, Tokyo Night. Actually, I use this one, Tokyo Night. So if you want that theme, please go ahead and install it. And now that we've talked about that, we come to the last point that I wanted to discuss basically in before we wrap up this chapter. which is our chapter 2. So now that we talked about a little bit of setup for setting up your Flutter installation and setting up your text editor, which in this case is Visual Studio Code, in the next chapter, which is chapter 3, we're going to talk about Dart programming. So before we actually jump into writing Flutter applications, we're going to talk about how to write code in Dart, or at least understand like the basics of Dart. So without further ado, let's close up this chapter, and I'll see you in the next one.